There is a war being fought right now, not in some distant land, not on a battlefield you can find on a map. The war is happening inside you, every single day, every single hour, every single moment you are alive and breathing and thinking and feeling. It is the war between who you are and who you could become, between the life you are living and the life you deserve to live, between the noise of the world outside and the silence of the truth within. And most people are losing this war, not because they are weak, not because they are broken, not because they lack talent or intelligence or ambition. They are losing because they have forgotten the most fundamental truth that the greatest minds in human history tried to teach us thousands of years ago. They have forgotten how to focus on themselves, not in a selfish way, not in a way that ignores others or dismisses compassion or abandons love, but in the deepest, most profound, most transformative way possible, in the way that the ancient Stoics meant when they looked at a world drowning in chaos and distraction and said, go inward and find what is real. Go inward and find what is yours. Go inward and find your power. Welcome to Stoic Wisdom. I am so glad you are here today. If this is your first time joining us, welcome to a community of people who are serious about building real strength, real peace, and real purpose in their lives. If you have been with us for a while, you already know what this channel is about. It is about going deeper. It is about doing the hard, beautiful, necessary work of becoming who you were always meant to be. Before we begin, I want to ask you something from the bottom of my heart. If what you hear today moves you, if it shifts something inside you, if it gives you even one thought that makes tomorrow better than today, please take a moment to like this video. It costs you nothing and it means the world to us. Share this with someone who needs it. Subscribe to Stoic Wisdom so you never miss a conversation like this one. And if you want to go even further, if you want to truly support this work and help us reach more people who are searching for exactly what we are building here, you can support the channel through Super Thanks. Every single contribution fuels this mission, and we are grateful beyond words for every one of you who shows up here. Now, let us begin, because what we are about to explore together is not just philosophy. It is not just ancient wisdom sitting in a dusty book, waiting to be admired from a distance. What we are about to explore is a way of living, a practice, a daily decision, a lifelong commitment to the one thing that every Stoic philosopher, from Marcus Aurelius to Epictetus to Seneca to Zeno, agreed was the foundation of everything: yourself. Part 1. The ancient call to turn inward. More than 2,000 years ago, in a world that was also chaotic, also loud, also full of distraction and suffering and confusion, a group of philosophers began meeting in a painted porch in Athens. They called their gathering place the Stoa Poikile, and the ideas born there would eventually travel across centuries, across empires, across languages and cultures and generations, all the way to this moment. This conversation, this screen, this room where you are sitting right now. The Stoics were not dreamers. They were not people who sat in comfortable towers and philosophized about abstract ideas that had no connection to real human struggle. They were soldiers and slaves and emperors. They were people who had lost children, lost empires, lost freedom, lost everything that the world told them mattered. And through all of that, they kept asking the same question: what is truly mine? Marcus Aurelius asked this question while ruling the most powerful empire the world had ever seen. He asked it while leading armies through brutal campaigns. He asked it while watching plague tear through his people. He wrote his answers in a private journal that was never meant to be published, a journal we now call the Meditations, and those answers have guided human beings through darkness for 2,000 years. What is truly mine? Epictetus asked this question from the position of a slave, a man who had no legal rights, a man whose body could be bought and sold, a man who was not free in any of the ways that the world defines freedom. And yet Epictetus was, by every account, one of the freest human beings who ever lived. because he understood something that his masters never understood. He understood that the only thing that was truly his, the only thing that could never be taken, never be bought, never be sold, never be controlled by any force on earth, was the space between what happened to him and how he chose to respond. That space, that sacred, sovereign, inviolable space, that is where Stoic philosophy lives, and that is where your power lives too. Because here is what the Stoics discovered, and what modern psychology is only now beginning to catch up with. The source of your suffering is almost never what is happening to you. It is what you are telling yourself about what is happening to you. It is the attention you are giving to things outside your control while neglecting the only domain that ever mattered. It is the energy you are pouring into changing other people, managing other people's opinions of you, trying to control outcomes that were never yours to control, while your own inner life sits in darkness, undeveloped, unexamined, untended. The ancient call of Stoicism is this: come home to yourself, come home to your mind, come home to your values. There, come home to the one relationship in your life that will outlast every other, the relationship you have with yourself. And this is not easy. Do not let anyone tell you it is easy. The world is designed to pull you outward. Social media is designed to pull you outward. Culture is designed to pull you outward. Even well-meaning people in your life will spend enormous energy pulling you away from yourself toward their expectations, their judgments, their ideas about who you should be and how you should live. Turning inward is an act of courage. Focusing on yourself is, in the truest and deepest sense, a radical act. And it is the most important act you will ever perform. Part 2. The Dichotomy of Control, the foundation of everything. If there is one idea at the heart of Stoic philosophy, one concept that every other teaching grows out of, one principle that you must understand before anything else can make sense, it is this: some things are in your control, and some things are not. This sounds simple. It sounds almost embarrassingly obvious. You might be thinking, yes, I know that. I have heard that before. Of course, some things are in my control, and some things are not. But here is the question I want you to sit with. Do you live like you know it? Because there is a profound difference between knowing something intellectually and actually living it. And the gap between those two things, the gap between knowing the dichotomy of control and actually practicing it every single day, is where most human suffering is born. Epictetus laid this out with devastating clarity at the very beginning of his Enchiridion, his handbook for life. He said, "Some things are up to us, and some things are not up to us. Up to us are opinion, motivation, desire, aversion, and in a word, whatever is our own action. Not up to us are our body, our property, reputation, office, and in a word, whatever is not our own action." Let us sit with this. Let us really sit with this. What is up to you? Your thoughts, your values, your intentions, your choices, your responses, your effort, your character, your integrity, your commitment, your courage, your honesty, your compassion, how you treat people, what you pursue, what you walk away from, what you give your attention to, what you allow to live in your mind. What is not up to you? Everything else. Your reputation not up to you, because reputation is what other people think of you, and you cannot control what other people think. Other people's behavior not up to you, the economy not up to you, the weather not up to you, what happened in your past not up to you, how long you live not up to you, whether people appreciate you not up to you, whether your efforts succeed in the way you hoped not up to you. Now notice what most people spend the majority of their time and energy on. Notice where the anxiety lives. Notice where the anger lives. Notice where the sleepless nights are born. They are almost always born in the territory of what is not up to you. You cannot sleep because of what someone said about you, what someone thinks of you, not up to you. You are consumed with anger because someone treated you unfairly, their behavior, not up to you. You are paralyzed by anxiety about whether your project will succeed, whether the market will go the right direction, whether the outcome will match your hopes. The outcome, not up to you. And while you are pouring your finite, precious, irreplaceable energy into things that are fundamentally not yours to control, the things that are yours, your mind, your character, your choices, your growth sit unattended, undeveloped, diminished. This is the great tragedy the Stoics were trying to prevent, and this is why focusing on yourself, really focusing on yourself, in the Stoic sense, is the path out. Because when you genuinely grasp the dichotomy of control, something extraordinary begins to happen. You stop leaking energy into things that can never be yours. You stop fighting battles that cannot be won. You stop measuring your worth against standards that were never true. And all of that energy, all of that enormous, accumulated, previously wasted energy comes flooding back to the only place it can actually create change. You, your inner world, your character, your mind, your choices, your life. And this is where the peace comes from. Not from the world becoming easier, not from other people changing, not from circumstances aligning. The peace comes from stopping the war you were never meant to fight and turning, finally, toward the one domain where your effort actually means something. Part 3. What it truly means to focus on yourself. There is a version of focusing on yourself that the Stoics would have found deeply misguided. It is the version that says ignore everyone, care about no one, pursue only your own pleasure and comfort, build walls, disconnect, protect yourself from feeling anything. That is not what this is. That is not self-focus. That is self-imprisonment. The Stoic vision of focusing on yourself is something far more beautiful, far more demanding, and far more rewarding than that. It is the practice of developing your inner excellence, what the Greeks called arete, so completely and so genuinely that everything you give to others, everything you contribute to the world, everything you bring to your relationships and your work and your community comes from a place of genuine wholeness rather than desperate need. Think about it this way. You cannot pour from an empty cup. You have heard this, but the Stoics would go further. They would say, a cracked cup cannot hold anything no matter how full you fill it. And most people are walking around with deeply cracked cups, cracked by unexamined beliefs, by unprocessed grief, by patterns inherited from childhood that were never questioned, by values they adopted from culture rather than chose for themselves. Focusing on yourself, in the Stoic sense, is the work of mending those cracks, of examining those beliefs, of questioning those patterns, of choosing consciously, deliberately, with full awareness, the values you will actually live by. It means developing what Stoics called the 4 cardinal virtues: wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. These 4 qualities were, to the Stoics, not merely admirable traits. They were the definition of a good human life. A life lived in accordance with these virtues was, by Stoic definition, a happy life, regardless of external circumstances. Wisdom, the ability to see clearly, to understand what is real and what is illusion, to know what matters and what does not, to act from understanding rather than from impulse or fear. Courage, the willingness to do what is right even when it is difficult, to face discomfort, uncertainty, and fear without being ruled by them, to act on your values even when the cost is high. Justice, the commitment to treating others rightly, to fulfilling your role in the human community with integrity and fairness and genuine care. Not because you will be rewarded for it, but because it is the right thing to do. Temperance, the discipline to govern yourself, to not be enslaved by desire, by comfort, by pleasure, by the need for approval, to be the master of yourself rather than the servant of your impulses. These 4 virtues are the territory of self-focus. This is what you are building when you commit to the Stoic path, and none of this can be done by looking outward. None of this can be achieved by managing your reputation or accumulating possessions or winning arguments or impressing people. This is inside work, all of it, every bit of it. And this is why Stoicism tells you to focus on yourself, not as a retreat from the world, but as the ultimate preparation for engaging with the world fully, freely, and well. Part 4. The Practice of Self-Examination. Marcus Aurelius began each morning, and we know this because the meditations are essentially his morning journal with a form of self-examination. Before the demands of empire descended upon him, before the meetings and the battles and the political maneuvering and the endless complexity of ruling millions of people, before any of that, he would sit with himself and ask the hard questions. Who am I today? What do I believe? What do I value? Am I living in accordance with those values? Where have I fallen short? Where have I let fear rule me? Where have I let anger speak for me? Where have I allowed vanity to distort my judgment? This practice, this daily, honest, courageous turning toward yourself and asking the hard questions, is what the Stoics called the examination of conscience. And it is one of the most powerful things you can do for your mental strength and inner peace. But notice what makes it hard. It requires honesty, not the performed honesty of public confession, not the honesty you show others to manage their impression of you, but the private, unflinching honesty you show yourself when no one is watching, when there is no audience, when there is no reward for telling the truth except the truth itself. Most people avoid this kind of self-examination because what they find is uncomfortable. We all have patterns we would rather not see, beliefs we would rather not question, fears we would rather not name, wounds we would rather not acknowledge. But here is what the Stoics understood that we desperately need to remember. The things you refuse to examine do not go away. They go underground, and the things that go underground grow roots. They become the invisible architecture of your behavior. They drive you from the dark, shaping your choices, your reactions, your relationships, your whole life, and you never even see them clearly enough to challenge them. Self-examination is not self-criticism. This is critical to understand. The goal is not to find reasons to feel bad about yourself. The goal is to see yourself clearly with compassion, with curiosity, with the same generous honesty you would extend to someone you deeply love. When you examine yourself and find that you reacted with anger yesterday, the question is not, what is wrong with me? The question is, what was I believing in that moment that made anger feel like the right response? What was I attached to? What did I think was at stake? Is that belief actually true? Is that attachment serving me? Is that stake really what I thought it was? This kind of examination, patient, honest, curious, compassionate, is how you gradually liberate yourself from patterns that are not serving you. It is how you begin to live more consciously, more deliberately, more freely. And over time, something remarkable begins to happen. The gap between what happens and how you respond grows wider. You become less reactive, less at the mercy of your old patterns, more able to choose, more able to respond from your values rather than from your history. This is the inner peace the Stoics promised, not the peace of a life without difficulty, but the peace of a mind that has learned to be the author of itself rather than the prisoner of its patterns. Part 5. Stopping the comparison trap. There is a thief walking through the modern world, and it is stealing peace and joy and self-respect from millions of people every single day. You probably know this thief well. You have probably felt its fingers in your pockets. You may have even invited it in. The thief is comparison. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Confine yourself to the present. Do not get lost in the future or the past." And though he was speaking primarily about time, the same wisdom applies to space. Do not get lost in other people's lives. Do not get lost in what someone else has, what someone else achieved, how someone else looks, what someone else has managed to accumulate or accomplish or become. Because here is the devastatingly simple truth about comparison. You are always comparing your insides to someone else's outsides. You see their curated presentation, their highlight reel, their best moments captured in favorable light, and you compare that to your raw, unfiltered, full-resolution experience of yourself, your doubts, your failures, your private embarrassments, your quiet struggles. This is not a fair comparison. It was never a fair comparison, and no amount of striving will make it fair, because the person you are comparing yourself to is also comparing themselves to someone else, and that person is comparing themselves to someone else, and the chain goes on forever. The Stoics would point to this and say, this is what happens when you look outward for your measure of worth. This is what happens when you allow external standards to define what counts as a good life, a successful life, a worthy life. They offered a different measure, a revolutionary measure, one that is entirely internal. The question is not, how do I compare to others? The question is, am I living in accordance with my own values? Am I being the person I have chosen to be? Am I growing? Am I contributing what I have to contribute? Am I treating people with justice? Am I acting with courage? Am I governing myself with wisdom? These questions have nothing to do with anyone else. You cannot answer them by looking at someone else's life. You can only answer them by looking at your own. And this is liberation, real liberation. Because when your measure is internal, when your standard is your own character, your own values, your own chosen path, then no one else's success threatens yours. No one else's achievement diminishes yours. No one else's life makes yours smaller. Someone else getting what they want does not mean there is less available for you. Someone else succeeding does not mean you have failed. Someone else being praised does not mean you are unworthy of recognition. You are on your own path. You are your own project. You are not in competition with anyone except the person you were yesterday. And that shift from external measurement to internal measurement, from comparison to self-focus, is one of the most liberating shifts a human being can make. Part 6. The Stoic Art of Solitude. In a world that celebrates constant connection, constant stimulation, constant productivity and activity and achievement, the Stoics had something almost countercultural to say. Be alone. Really alone. Not the alone of scrolling through your phone in a room by yourself. Not the alone of consuming content while surrounded by virtual crowds. Real alone. Quiet alone. The alone where you sit with yourself, and there is nothing between you and your own mind. Seneca, who understood both the pleasures and the dangers of Roman social life, wrote about the importance of retreating into yourself. He said, retire into yourself as much as possible. Associate with people who will make a better man of you. Receive those whom you yourself can improve. But most of all, retire into yourself. Why? Because the self is where truth lives. The self is where clarity is born. The self is where you can hear the signals that the noise of the world drowns out the signal of your genuine values, your genuine desires, your genuine wisdom about what your life is asking of you. Most people are afraid of their own company. This is one of the most important things to understand about modern life. The desperate hunger for stimulation, the compulsive reaching for the phone, the inability to sit in silence for more than a few minutes, these are not just habits. They are often symptoms of a fear of what we might find if we stopped and actually listened to ourselves. And the tragedy is that what we are afraid of finding is almost always less terrible than the fear itself. What we find in solitude when we stay with it long enough to get past the initial discomfort is not emptiness. It is not darkness. It is ourselves, our real selves. Our values, our dreams, our grief, our wisdom, our creativity, our power. The Stoics practiced solitude not as punishment or deprivation, but as nourishment. They understood that the inner life needs tending just as much as the outer life. That the mind, like a garden, needs both attention and quiet to produce its best fruit. And this is something you can begin right now. Not a grand retreat, not a dramatic withdrawal from the world, just daily moments of genuine solitude. 5 minutes in the morning before reaching for your phone, a walk without earphones, a meal eaten without screens, a few minutes in the evening to sit with the day and ask yourself, how did I do? Who was I today? What do I want tomorrow to look like? These small practices compound. They build a relationship with yourself. They train you to recognize your own voice, your real voice, beneath the noise, so that when life demands a response, you can draw on something real rather than something borrowed. Part 7. Emotional Mastery, the Stoic Way. Let us address something that is very often misunderstood about Stoicism. There is a popular idea that Stoics were cold, emotionless, that they suppressed feelings and practiced a kind of robotic detachment from human experience. This is completely wrong, and it matters that we get this right. The Stoics were not against emotions. They were against being controlled by emotions. They were against being enslaved by passions, by the automatic, unconsidered, reflexive emotional reactions that drive you to act in ways that violate your values and damage your life. Marcus Aurelius wept when his friends and teachers died. Seneca wrote with beautiful vulnerability about loss and grief and the difficulty of the human condition. Epictetus talked about love, genuine, fierce, committed love, as one of the natural and beautiful expressions of human nature. The Stoics were not cold. They were warm in the truest and deepest sense. They simply refused to be ruled. The distinction is important. Feeling anger is not the problem. Anger is information. It tells you that something in your environment is threatening something you value. The question is, what do you do with that information? Do you let it rule you? Do you let it speak before you have thought? Do you let it damage your relationships and your reputation and your sense of yourself because you could not pause long enough to choose your response? Or do you feel the anger, acknowledge it, understand what it is telling you, and then decide from your values, from your wisdom, from your commitment to your own integrity, how you want to respond? This is emotional mastery, not suppression, not pretending feelings don't exist, not performing a cold indifference that is actually just another way of being controlled by the need to seem strong, controlled by the fear of appearing vulnerable. Real emotional mastery is the capacity to feel everything fully and still choose your response. It is the development of that gap, that sacred space between stimulus and response that Viktor Frankl wrote about from the depths of a concentration camp. It is the practice of being the author of your emotional life rather than the character at the mercy of the plot. And how do you develop this? Through exactly the practices we have been talking about. Through self-examination, through solitude, through honest engagement with your own inner life. Through the consistent, patient work of understanding what your emotions are telling you, what values they are signaling, what beliefs they are rooted in, what stories you are telling yourself that are generating them. Over time, this practice changes you, not into someone who feels less, into someone who has more choice about what they do with what they feel, someone who can be moved without being swept away, someone who can be touched without being shattered, someone who can feel the full weight of human experience and remain, through all of it, fundamentally themselves. This is mental strength, real mental strength. The strength not to feel less but to remain yourself while feeling everything. Part 8. The present moment is your only home. One of the most devastating ways human beings abandon themselves, and this is something the Stoics understood with profound clarity, is by refusing to be present. We live almost everywhere except where we actually are. We live in the past, rehearsing old conversations, replaying old wounds, carrying regrets about choices that cannot be unmade, and grievances about moments that cannot be revisited. We live in the future, projecting disaster scenarios, running anxious calculations about problems that may never arrive, trying to control outcomes that do not exist yet. And the present moment, the only moment that is real, the only moment where you can actually act, actually choose, actually live, gets almost no attention at all. Marcus Aurelius returned to this again and again in his journals. He wrote, "Confine yourself to the present." He wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." He wrote, "It is not death that a man should fear, but he should fear never beginning to live." To begin to live, to actually be here, in this life, in this moment, in this body, in this breath. This is what focusing on yourself ultimately means. At the deepest level, it means being present to your actual experience rather than constantly escaping into the virtual experience of memory or imagination. And this is not just philosophy. The research on mindfulness and well-being, which is, in many ways, a modern scientific exploration of ideas the Stoics had already articulated, confirms what Marcus Aurelius knew in the 2nd century. A wandering mind is an unhappy mind. The capacity to be present, to actually inhabit your life as it is happening, is one of the strongest predictors of well-being that psychology has found. But being present is hard, harder than it sounds, because the past and the future have enormous gravity. The wounds and regrets of the past pull at you. The fears and hopes of the future pull at you. And the present moment, quiet, plain, unspectacular compared to the drama playing out in your head, does not pull at all. It simply waits. The practice of presence is, in one sense, the practice of choosing the real over the imagined, choosing what is actually happening over what might happen or what already happened, choosing to engage with the life in front of you rather than the life in your head. And when you do this, not perfectly, not always, but more and more, as a practice, as a discipline, as a commitment, you begin to discover something extraordinary. The present moment, which seems so plain and unremarkable compared to the rich drama of your mental theater, is actually full, genuinely, completely, startlingly full. The warmth of sunlight, the weight of your own breath, the sound of the world going about its business, the faces of the people you love, the particular quality of this specific hour, of this specific day that will never come again, all of this is here. All of this is real. And most of it goes completely unnoticed by people who are living everywhere except where they are. This is not a small thing. Recovering your attention, returning it to the present, building your capacity to be actually here. This is one of the most profound and consequential practices in the entire Stoic tradition. Part 9. Building your inner citadel. Marcus Aurelius had a concept he returned to repeatedly in the Meditations. He called it the inner citadel, and this metaphor is one of the most powerful and useful ideas in the entire Stoic tradition. Imagine a fortress, not made of stone and mortar, but made of thought and character and commitment, a fortress that exists entirely within you, that cannot be touched by external events, that cannot be breached by other people's opinions or cruelty or manipulation, that cannot be burned by failure or flooded by grief or shaken by change. This is the inner citadel, the stable core of a Stoic life, the place inside you that remains fundamentally yourself regardless of what the world throws at your walls. Now, here is the critical thing. This fortress does not come built. You construct it, brick by brick, decision by decision, practice by practice, day by day and year by year, through the consistent, sometimes tedious, often difficult, ultimately magnificent work of building your character. Every time you choose your values over your impulses, you lay another brick. Every time you respond thoughtfully instead of reacting automatically, you lay another brick. Every time you resist the temptation to let other people's opinions define your worth, you lay another brick. Every time you do the hard thing because it is the right thing, you lay another brick. Every time you choose honesty over comfort, courage over convenience, growth over ease, you lay another brick. And slowly, gradually, the citadel rises, and you begin to notice that things which used to destabilize you completely no longer have the same power, not because you have become indifferent to them, not because you have stopped caring, but because you have built something inside yourself that is more solid than any of the storms that blow through your life. This is what mental strength actually means. Not the absence of vulnerability, not the performance of toughness, but the genuine solidity of a character that has been built through practice, that has been tested and proven and refined through the honest engagement with difficulty over time. And this is why focusing on yourself in the Stoic sense, the deep sense, the sense that the meditations were written about, is not a retreat from life. It is the construction of the self that will meet life fully, without flinching, without pretending, without breaking. The inner citadel is your greatest project, more important than your career, more important than your reputation, more important than your bank account or your social standing or any external achievement you could ever accumulate, because all of those things can be taken. But what you build inside yourself, your character, your values, your wisdom, your strength, is yours forever. Part 10. The relationship between self-focus and service. Here is something that often surprises people who are new to Stoicism. The philosophy that most insistently tells you to focus on yourself is also the philosophy that most insistently tells you to serve others. These two things are not in contradiction. They are the same thing, understood from different angles. The Stoics believed deeply in what they called cosmopolitanism, the idea that we are all citizens of a shared humanity, that we have obligations to each other, that the good life is not a life of private contentment, but a life of genuine contribution to the community we belong to. Marcus Aurelius, arguably the most powerful person in the world during his lifetime, wrote, "What injures the hive injures the bee." He genuinely believed that his flourishing and the flourishing of his people were inseparable, that you cannot truly thrive in isolation from the flourishing of those around you. But, and this is the crucial but, you can only serve others genuinely from a place of genuine wholeness. You can only give what you actually have. And what most people who neglect themselves discover, painfully and often too late, is that you cannot sustain generosity, compassion, strength, wisdom, and patience if you are running on empty. If you are unexamined and ungrounded and unfocused, you will give, but what you give will be conditional, will be performance, will be driven by need rather than genuine love. The Stoic path says, do the work on yourself, build your character, develop your wisdom, cultivate your inner citadel. And then from that place of genuine wholeness, from that fortress of character and value and clarity, go out and give. Give everything you have. Serve your family, serve your community. Serve the broader human enterprise of which you are a part. This is why focusing on yourself is not selfish. Done correctly, done sincerely, done in the genuine Stoic spirit, it is the most generous thing you can do. Because what you are developing is the capacity to be genuinely good, genuinely wise, genuinely useful, not performing virtue, not managing impressions, actually, really, substantively good. And a person who has done that work, who has built that citadel, who has cultivated those virtues, who has developed that inner life, is one of the rarest and most precious things the world contains. A person who genuinely helps because they genuinely have something to give. A person who is present because they have learned to be present to themselves. A person who offers wisdom because they have sat in the fire of their own honest self-examination. This is the Stoic ideal, not the cold philosopher in the tower, not the indifferent sage untouched by human feeling, but the person who has done enough inner work to be genuinely warm, genuinely strong, genuinely useful to themselves and to everyone they encounter. Part 11. Obstacles and the Stoic response. There is a phrase associated with Marcus Aurelius that has become almost famous in recent years, and for good reason. The obstacle is the way. It comes from a passage in the Meditations where he writes, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." Let us understand what this means, because it is one of the most radical and counterintuitive ideas in all of Stoic philosophy. We are trained by culture to see obstacles as interruptions, as delays, as evidence that something is going wrong, as forces to be defeated, avoided, or endured until they pass. The obstacle is something that stands between us and where we are going, something external and hostile that has nothing to teach us. The Stoics saw it completely differently. The obstacle is not separate from your path. The obstacle is part of your path. It is, in many cases, the most important part of your path, because it is in the encounter with genuine difficulty, real resistance, real failure, real loss, real challenge, that character is actually formed, that wisdom is actually won, that strength is actually built. You cannot develop courage without something to be afraid of. You cannot develop patience without something that tests your patience. You cannot develop wisdom without the experience of making mistakes and sitting with their consequences. You cannot develop genuine compassion without having suffered. The obstacles are not in the way, they are the way. And this shifts everything, because if obstacles are the way, if difficulty is part of the design rather than evidence of its failure, then you stop spending your energy fighting the reality of your situation and start spending it engaging, creatively, courageously, and effectively with whatever is actually in front of you. This does not mean you should welcome suffering. It does not mean you should seek out pain. It means that when difficulty arrives, as it will, because it always does, for everyone, you do not collapse in despair or rage at the unfairness of existence. You ask the Stoic question, what is this asking of me? What is this developing in me? What can I learn here? How can I respond to this in a way that is consistent with my values and my character? This reframing is not a trick. It is not positive thinking dressed up in ancient clothing. It is a genuine shift in relationship to reality, one that transforms the experience of difficulty from pure suffering into something that carries within it the seeds of your greatest growth. And this too is part of focusing on yourself, because it means refusing to give obstacles the power to define your experience, refusing to let circumstances write your story, claiming authorship of your own response, your own meaning, your own trajectory through whatever the world presents. Part 12. Daily Stoic Practices for Inner Peace. Philosophy without practice is just entertainment. The Stoics were relentlessly practical. They did not want their ideas admired. They wanted their ideas lived. And so, before we bring this conversation toward its close, I want to give you something concrete, something you can actually do, starting today. These are the daily practices that the Stoics actually used to build inner peace and mental strength. Not abstract concepts, actual exercises, actual disciplines. Things that, done consistently, will change you from the inside out. The first practice is the morning reflection. Before the day begins, before the noise arrives, before the demands and the notifications and the obligations crowd in, sit with yourself. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, as long as you can, and ask yourself, what kind of person do I want to be today? What values do I want to live by? What am I likely to face today, and how do I want to respond? What would the best version of me choose in the situations I am likely to encounter? This is not wishful thinking. It is preparation. It is setting the compass of your character before the storms of the day have a chance to spin it. The second practice is the negative visualization. The Stoics called this premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. It sounds grim. It is actually one of the most life-enriching practices in the entire tradition. Take something you love, a relationship, a possession, a capacity, an experience, and spend a few minutes genuinely contemplating its absence. What would your life be like without this person, without this ability, without this comfort you take for granted? Feel the weight of that absence. And then look at what you actually have and feel what arises. Gratitude, real gratitude. Not the performed gratitude of social media, but the bone-deep, heart-stopping gratitude that comes from truly recognizing what you have while you still have it. The Stoics knew that we adapt to good things terrifyingly fast. We stop seeing them. We stop appreciating them. We take them for granted until they are gone. Negative visualization is the practice of keeping the good things visible, of seeing them clearly, of not wasting the time you have with the people and experiences you love by ceasing to recognize their value. The third practice is the view from above. Marcus Aurelius used this regularly. Step back, in your imagination, from whatever is consuming your attention in this moment. Zoom out. See yourself from above, a small figure in a city, in a country, on a continent, on a planet, in a solar system, in a galaxy, in a universe so vast that the distance between our sun and our nearest neighbor is almost incomprehensible. See the perspective that this gives. See how the problem that seems so enormous and consuming from the inside looks from up there. This is not nihilism. It is not an argument that nothing matters. It is an argument for proportion. A reminder that most of what we treat as catastrophic is, from the perspective of time and space, rather small. And this perspective, this cosmic step back, can release enormous amounts of anxiety and restore the clarity needed to engage well with what actually is important. The fourth practice is the evening examination. At the close of the day, sit with what happened. Not to judge yourself harshly, remember, this is compassionate, curious examination, not self-criticism, but to understand. Where did I act in accordance with my values today? Where did I fall short? What triggered me and why? What can I learn from how this day went? What will I carry into tomorrow? The Stoics, and particularly Seneca, practiced this review of the day as a form of daily self-care, a daily course correction. Not waiting for years or decades to look back and understand the patterns, doing it every single night so that the learning is always fresh, the correction always immediate, the practice always alive. The fifth practice is acting within your circle. Every time you notice yourself spending energy on something outside your control, worrying about what someone thinks, stressing about outcomes you cannot determine, resenting circumstances you cannot change, pause. Name it. This is outside my control. And then deliberately redirect your attention to your circle of control. What can I actually do here? What choice is actually mine? What response can I actually determine? This practice, done consistently, is one of the most powerful redirectors of mental energy that exists. It stops the leaking. It brings you home. It reminds you, again and again, that your power lives inside, and every moment of anxiety about the outside is a moment stolen from the work that actually matters. Part 13. The long game of the Stoic life. We live in a world of instant gratification, quick results, overnight transformation, before and after pictures, 3 steps to happiness, 7 habits to success. And these promises are seductive because we are impatient. We want to feel better now. We want to be stronger now. We want the inner peace now. The Stoics were long-game thinkers. They understood that character is not built in a moment, that wisdom is not acquired in a week, that the inner citadel is not constructed overnight. This is not discouraging, it is liberating, because it means that every single day, every single choice, every single practice, every single moment of honest self-examination, every single time you choose your values over your impulses matters. Not because it will transform you by itself, but because it is a brick, and bricks become walls, and walls become fortresses, and fortresses become places where human beings can live in genuine peace and genuine strength. Seneca wrote, "It is not that I hope to enjoy more years. I want to make better use of the ones I have." Every day of honest Stoic practice is a day of better use. Every day you spend developing your inner life rather than just your external circumstances is a day that compounds, that adds to the structure of who you are becoming. This is a life's work, not a project with a completion date. a practice that deepens and refines and matures as you do, a relationship with yourself that grows richer the longer you cultivate it. And this, the long-game commitment to your own inner development, is the most countercultural act available in the modern world. In a world that wants your attention fragmented and your desires inflamed and your sense of self contingent on external validation, deciding to be a long-game player in the project of your own character is genuinely radical. It means deciding that who you are matters more than how you appear, that what you actually value matters more than what you are supposed to want, that the slow, unglamorous, deeply rewarding work of building your inner life matters more than the spectacular, constantly refreshing performance of your outer life. And those who make this decision, who commit to this path, who show up for the daily practice, who embrace the long game, discover something that the ancient Stoics knew and tried to give to every generation that came after them. They discover that the life built from the inside out is the only life that is truly free, that the peace built from the inside out is the only peace that is truly real, that the strength built from the inside out is the only strength that cannot be taken. Part 14. Letters to your future self. Seneca wrote letters, dozens and dozens of letters to his friend Lucilius, letters that were really, in many ways, letters to himself, letters working through questions of how to live, how to think, how to face death, how to manage time, how to maintain integrity in a world that did not always reward it. These letters were acts of self-focus, acts of turning inward in writing, in thought, in the honest examination of what he believed and why he believed it. They were a practice of self-clarity, of knowing yourself clearly enough to articulate what you know. There is wisdom in this for each of us. The practice of writing, of journaling, of putting your thoughts into words, of creating a record of your inner life is one of the most powerful tools for self-development that exists. Not because the writing itself changes anything, but because the act of writing forces clarity. You cannot write what you have not thought. You cannot express what you have not examined. The page demands specificity in a way that the mind, left to itself, often does not. When Marcus Aurelius wrote his Meditations again, never intending them for publication, writing only for himself, he was doing something profound. He was making himself accountable to himself. He was creating a record of his intentions and his failures and his striving and his learning. He was engaging in the most honest conversation he could have, because the only audience was himself. You can do this too, not because you are Marcus Aurelius, not because your words will be read 2,000 years from now, but because you deserve the clarity that comes from sitting with yourself in writing, because you deserve the record of your own growth, because you deserve the accountability of reading back what you wrote last month, last year, 5 years ago, and seeing clearly how far you have come and how far you still want to go. This is self-focus made visible, self-focus given form. The inner life written down so it can be seen clearly, examined honestly, and engaged with effectively. Part 15. The courage to be yourself. We have been talking through this entire conversation about what it means to focus on yourself, and I want to bring us, near the end, to what I think is the deepest layer of this teaching, the layer that everything else has been preparing us for. The Stoics were ultimately calling us to something extraordinarily brave, something that sounds simple and is actually one of the hardest things a human being can attempt. They were calling us to be ourselves, truly, completely, without apology, without performance, without the endless modifications and adjustments and concessions we make to manage other people's impressions and accommodate other people's expectations and avoid other people's disapproval. Be yourself, not the self you perform for an audience, not the self you construct to fit in, to be approved of, to avoid conflict, not the self that says what it knows will be well received or does what it knows will be praised or avoids what it knows will be criticized. The real self, The self that has values, specific, chosen, genuinely held values, and lives by them regardless of whether the world approves. The self that has a perspective, an honest, considered, genuinely held perspective and expresses it with respect but without apology. The self that has desires and goals and dreams that are authentically its own, not borrowed from culture or inherited from parents or adopted to please a partner or impress a peer group. This is what Stoic philosophy, at its deepest level, is asking of you. It is asking you to find out who you actually are underneath the performance, underneath the conditioning, underneath the layers of other people's expectations that have accumulated since childhood, and then to be that person, as fully and as courageously and as consistently as you can. Epictetus said, "Know, first, who you are, and then adorn yourself accordingly." Know who you are. This is the first and fundamental task. Before strategy, before tactics, before goals and plans and actions and achievements. Know who you are. Know what you value. Know what you believe. Know what you are willing to stand for and what you are not willing to compromise. Know the difference between what you were told to want and what you actually want. Know the difference between the person you were trained to be and the person you choose to be. And then, having done that hard and honest work of self-knowledge, adorn yourself accordingly. Build your life around what you discover. Make your choices from that core. Let your relationships, your work, your daily habits, your long-term trajectory all flow from that central, honest, courageous knowledge of who you actually are. This is the fullness of what it means to focus on yourself in the Stoic tradition. Not self-indulgence, not self-obsession, not the narcissistic preoccupation with your own image and reputation and comfort, but the deep, disciplined, courageous, compassionate turning toward your own truth and the equally courageous commitment to living from it. This is where inner peace lives, not in the absence of difficulty, not in the perfect arrangement of circumstances, but in the alignment between who you are and how you live. In the integrity in the literal sense of the word, integration, wholeness, all parts of yourself in agreement of a life lived from the inside out. Part 16, the final Stoic invitation. We are nearing the end of our time together today, and I want to leave you with something. Not a conclusion, because this is not something that concludes. It is something that begins, or continues, or deepens. It is always beginning or continuing or deepening for those who stay committed to the path. I want to leave you with an invitation. The Stoics did not build their philosophy as a monument to be admired. They built it as a tool to be used, as a set of practices to be lived, as a way of meeting this one life, this specific, unrepeatable, brief, and precious human life with the full force of your attention and your commitment and your choice. Every great Stoic philosopher, from the founder Zeno of Citium, who began this tradition more than 2,000 years ago, to the last of the great Roman Stoics, was essentially issuing the same invitation in different words. The invitation is this: you have more power than you think, not over the world, not over other people, not over outcomes and circumstances and the vast, complex machinery of events that constitutes human history, but over yourself, over your mind, over your values, over your choices, over who you become in response to what happens to you. That power, that extraordinary, underused, often abandoned power, is waiting for you. It has always been waiting for you. It waited while you looked outward. It waited while you managed your reputation. It waited while you compared yourself to others and found yourself wanting. It waited while you chased external validations and accumulations that promised to fill a gap they could never actually fill. It is still waiting, right now, in this moment, in the space behind your thoughts and beneath your habits, and beyond the noise that fills most of your waking hours. Go inward. That is the invitation. Go inward. Find what is real there. Find what is yours. Find your values, your wisdom, your courage, your capacity for genuine peace. Find the person you have been underneath everything the world has layered on top of you all along. And then from that place, build. Build your inner citadel brick by brick. Build your character choice by choice. Build your life from the inside out, from the real rather than the performed, from the chosen rather than the inherited, from the genuinely yours rather than the borrowed from somewhere else. This is the Stoic path. It is not easy. It is not glamorous. It does not promise quick results or external rewards or the approval of people who do not understand what you are doing and why. But it promises something far more valuable than any of those things. It promises you yourself, and that singular, irreplaceable, forever available gift is the greatest thing this philosophy, or any philosophy, has ever had to offer. We have traveled a long way together today, through the ancient porches of Athens and the private journals of a Roman emperor, and the teaching halls of a former slave and the quiet, powerful territory of your own inner life. We have talked about what it means to truly focus on yourself, not in the shallow way the modern world sometimes means that phrase, but in the deep, demanding, ultimately liberating way that the Stoics meant it. We have talked about the dichotomy of control, the foundational teaching that separates what is yours from what is not, and the liberation that comes from finally, genuinely honoring that distinction. We have talked about self-examination and solitude and emotional mastery and presence. We have talked about the inner citadel and the long game and the courage it takes to simply be, fully and honestly, yourself. And I genuinely, sincerely hope that something in this conversation has landed for you, that something has shifted, that you are leaving this video with not just ideas but with energy, with a sense of what is possible when you stop fighting the battles that were never yours to fight and turn your full attention to the only project that was always, entirely, completely yours, yourself. If this conversation meant something to you today, I want to ask you to do something. Not for us, for the people who need to hear this. Share this video. There is someone in your life who is exhausted from fighting battles they cannot win, from measuring themselves against standards that were never true, from looking everywhere except the one place where their power actually lives. Share this with them. You might give them something they have been searching for longer than they know. Please like this video if it moved you, if it challenged you, if it gave you even one thing that makes tomorrow better than today. Your like tells us that this work matters and helps us reach more people who are ready for it. Leave a comment below. Tell us what resonated. Tell us what you are going to practice. Tell us where you are in this journey. Tell us what you are still struggling with. This community is built on honest conversation, and your voice is part of what makes it real. Subscribe to Stoic Wisdom if you have not already, and ring that notification bell so you never miss a conversation like this one. We are here every week, going deeper into the ideas that matter, the ideas that do not just sound good but actually change lives when they are lived. And if you want to go further, if you want to truly support this mission and help us build something that reaches more and more people who are searching for exactly this, you can support the channel through Super Thanks. Every single contribution means the world to us and goes directly into making this work better, richer, and more far-reaching. We are deeply grateful for every one of you who chooses to invest in this community. Most importantly, go do the work, not tomorrow, not when conditions are perfect. Now, today, this evening, sit with yourself for 5 minutes and ask the honest questions. Tomorrow morning, before the noise begins, set the compass of your character for the day ahead. Start building, brick by brick, choice by choice, day by day. The inner citadel is waiting. Your real self is waiting. The life that is genuinely, authentically, deeply yours, built from the inside out, from what is real, rather than what is performed, is waiting. Go build it. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring enough about your inner life to spend this time with us. It is an honor to share this path with you. Until next time, keep going inward, keep building, Keep choosing the hard, beautiful, necessary work of becoming who you were always meant to be. This is Stoic wisdom, and you are exactly where you need to be.